Sometimes the greatest miracle does not begin with a cure. It begins with someone refusing to stop believing. Long after the evening sun disappeared behind the skyline of downtown Chicago, the lights inside St. Gabriel Children's Medical Center continued glowing against the quiet darkness. The steady rhythm of heart monitors echoed through polished hallways while nurses moved gently from room to room, their soft footsteps blending with the distant hum of elevators and quiet conversations that never seemed to end. On the fourth floor, outside room 417, Alexander Whitmore stood alone beside a wide hospital window overlooking the city. At 41 years old, the white American billionaire CEO had spent his entire career solving impossible business problems with confidence, patience, and determination. Yet none of those qualities could help him tonight. Through the glass door he watched his 8-year-old son, Ethan, lying silently beneath a light blue blanket. The room felt peaceful, but not hopeful. Several colorful drawings hung neatly on one wall. Untouched books rested beside the bed, and a small toy astronaut sat near the window waiting for hands that no longer reached toward it. Ethan stared quietly toward the ceiling while the gentle beeping of medical equipment marked each passing second. A senior physician stepped into the hallway carrying a tablet before removing his glasses with a weary expression. He spoke softly, careful not to disturb the quiet surrounding the room. "Mr. Whitmore, we have reviewed every result again." Alexander looked toward the doctor without saying a word. "We will continue providing every appropriate treatment and every possible form of support," the physician continued. "But right now the progress we hope to see has simply not appeared. Our team believes Ethan needs time, comfort, and every opportunity to regain his confidence. We cannot force that process." Alexander slowly nodded, even though the words settled heavily inside him. "So you are telling me there is nothing else to try tonight?" The doctor hesitated before answering honestly. "Tonight, the greatest thing we can offer your son is patience." After the physician quietly walked away, Alexander remained standing outside the room. He had purchased companies worth billions of dollars, built hospitals through charitable foundations, and funded medical research across the country. None of it changed the silence inside room 417. He gently entered the room and sat beside Ethan's bed. "Hey, buddy," he whispered with a warm smile he barely managed to hold together. "The city looks beautiful tonight." Ethan never turned his head. After several long seconds, he spoke so softly that Alexander almost missed the words. "Dad." Alexander leaned closer. "I am right here." Ethan closed his eyes. Everything is too loud. The machines were not loud. The room itself was almost silent. Yet Alexander understood his son was describing something no monitor could measure. He carefully rested his hand beside Ethan's without asking him to speak again. Minutes passed while neither of them said another word. Outside the room, families quietly visited loved ones. Nurses offered gentle encouragement, and another ordinary hospital night continued one careful step at a time. Down the same hallway, an elevator door opened as Naomi Parker stepped out holding the hand of her 7-year-old daughter, Maya. The 32-year-old Black American single mother carried a small backpack over one shoulder while Maya hugged a stuffed rabbit close against her chest. They had returned for a routine follow-up appointment scheduled early the next morning, and the hospital had offered them a room for the night. As they slowly walked toward their room, Naomi noticed the faint glow spilling from room 417 and the quiet sadness resting just beyond its doorway. She glanced inside for only a moment before continuing down the hallway, unaware that by sunrise 2 families who had never met would begin changing each other's lives forever. The hospital settled into the quiet rhythm that only existed a few hours before dawn. Hallway lights were dimmed, conversations became whispers, and the steady sound of heart monitors blended with the distant hum of heating vents as another night slowly surrendered to morning. Naomi Parker helped Maya climb onto the small hospital bed in their temporary room before carefully tucking the blanket around her shoulders. Maya smiled sleepily while holding her worn stuffed rabbit close against her chest. "Will we go home after my appointment?" she asked softly. Naomi brushed a loose curl away from her daughter's forehead. "If everything looks good tomorrow, we will stop for pancakes on the way home." Maya smiled. "With strawberries?" Naomi laughed quietly. "With extra strawberries." Within minutes, Maya drifted peacefully to sleep. Naomi quietly stepped into the hallway carrying a paper cup of warm tea, hoping the silence might help clear her thoughts before another long day. As she slowly walked toward the family lounge, she noticed the same room she had passed earlier that evening. The door to room 417 remained slightly open. She could hear no conversation inside, only the gentle rhythm of medical equipment and the occasional soft footsteps of nurses passing by. Then she heard something else. A child's voice, almost too quiet to understand. "I just want the noise to stop." Naomi froze for a moment. Those simple words carried a familiar weight. Years earlier, Maya had spoken nearly the same sentence during a difficult period of extended treatment, not because the room had been loud, but because fear itself had become overwhelming. Naomi gently looked through the partially open doorway without stepping inside. Ethan still faced the window while Alexander remained seated quietly beside the bed, searching for words that never seemed to come. A nurse entered briefly to check equipment before offering Alexander a gentle smile. "He has been very quiet tonight," she said. Alexander nodded. "I know." The nurse adjusted Ethan's blanket before leaving just as quietly as she had arrived. Naomi hesitated. She understood hospital boundaries and respected them deeply. She had no intention of interrupting another family's private struggle. Yet something inside her remembered the nights when one kind voice had made all the difference for Maya. She quietly approached the nurse's station instead. "Excuse me," she asked politely. "Is the little boy in room 417 all right?" The nurse smiled kindly but carefully protected the family's privacy. "He is receiving excellent care. It has simply been a difficult week." Naomi nodded with understanding. "I thought so." She thanked the nurse and turned to walk away. Just then another faint whisper drifted from the open doorway. "Please make it quiet." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. She remembered Maya covering her ears in the same way years ago, overwhelmed not by sound, but by worry and uncertainty. Before she realized it, she had quietly walked back toward the room. Alexander noticed her standing respectfully near the doorway and immediately rose to his feet. Naomi offered an apologetic smile. "I am sorry for disturbing you. I only wanted to say something that another mother once needed to hear. Sometimes children are not asking us to silence the room. Sometimes they are asking us to help quiet everything they are carrying inside." Alexander looked at the stranger with surprise. There was no confidence born from professional titles, no promise of easy answers, only the calm honesty of someone who had walked a difficult road herself. For the first time in many exhausting days, he did not feel as though someone was speaking to his wealth or his influence. They were simply speaking to his heart as a father. Alexander Whitmore remained silent for several long moments as he studied the woman standing quietly outside room 417. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance. She wore a simple navy sweater over a comfortable pair of jeans, carried a paper cup of tea that had already grown cold, and looked more like an exhausted mother than someone about to change another family's life. Yet there was a calm confidence in her eyes that made him hesitate before politely asking, "Have we met before?" Naomi Parker gently shook her head. "No. I only recognized something in your son's voice because my daughter once said the same words." Alexander glanced back toward Ethan before looking at Naomi again. "Would you mind telling me what happened?" Naomi smiled softly. "Only if you understand that every child is different. I am not a doctor, and I would never pretend to be one." Alexander nodded immediately. "I understand." Naomi looked through the doorway toward Ethan. There was a time when Maya became overwhelmed after spending so many days inside hospitals. She was surrounded by wonderful doctors and caring nurses, but she kept telling me everything felt too loud. One evening, an older nurse sat beside us and reminded me that children sometimes need someone to slow the world down before they can find their own peace again. Alexander listened carefully, surprised by how naturally her words settled into the quiet hallway. Naomi continued. "She showed me something very simple. Not medicine, not treatment, just presence." Alexander frowned slightly. "Presence." Naomi nodded. A calm voice, gentle breathing, a familiar rhythm, something that reminds a frightened child they are not facing the moment alone. At that moment, Ethan shifted slightly beneath his blanket and quietly covered one ear with his hand. Naomi instinctively lowered her own voice. "May I say hello to him? Only for a minute. If either of you feels uncomfortable, I will leave immediately." Alexander looked toward his son before answering. "I think he could use one kind voice tonight." Naomi stepped carefully into the room, remaining several feet from the bed so Ethan would not feel crowded. She knelt until her eyes were level with his without asking him to look at her. For several seconds, she simply allowed the silence to exist. Then she spoke in a warm, steady voice. "Hi, Ethan. My name is Naomi. My daughter and I are staying down the hall tonight." Ethan did not respond, but his breathing became slightly slower. Naomi gently rested one hand over her own heart and quietly tapped a slow, even rhythm with her fingertips. Tap, pause, tap, pause. The sound was barely noticeable, softer than the distant heartbeat of the monitor beside the bed. After a few moments, she began humming a simple lullaby her mother had sung to her when she was a little girl. The melody floated gently through the room without competing with the quiet around it. Alexander watched in complete silence. Nothing dramatic happened. No miracle appeared. The machines continued their steady rhythm exactly as before. Yet after another minute, Ethan slowly lowered his hand from his ear. His shoulders relaxed slightly beneath the blanket, and for the first time that evening he turned his head just enough to glance toward the unfamiliar woman sitting calmly beside him. Naomi smiled without speaking another word. She simply continued the soft rhythm until Ethan quietly closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing settled into the peaceful pattern of natural sleep. Alexander remained frozen where he stood, afraid that even one unnecessary movement might interrupt the first truly restful moment his son had experienced in many exhausting days. He looked at Naomi with quiet disbelief, but she only smiled gently and whispered, "Sometimes children do not need someone to solve every problem. Sometimes they only need someone who knows how to make the world feel safe again." The first light of morning slipped quietly through the blinds of room 417, covering the floor with pale golden stripes that slowly reached the foot of Ethan's bed. Outside the window, the city was beginning another busy day, but inside the room, time seemed to move more gently than it had the night before. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor continued, yet something subtle had changed. Instead of restless tossing and anxious whispers, Ethan remained peacefully asleep, his breathing slow and even as soft sunlight warmed the blanket around him. Alexander Whitmore had not slept at all. He remained seated in the same chair beside the bed, replaying every moment from the previous evening in his mind. He had expected another long night filled with worry. Instead, he had watched his son find a quiet peace that no conversation, expensive treatment, or sleepless vigil had managed to bring. When the morning nurse entered with a warm smile, she paused almost immediately. She glanced at Ethan's chart before looking back toward the sleeping boy. "He rested for nearly 6 uninterrupted hours," she said with pleasant surprise. "That has not happened in quite some time." Alexander nodded quietly. "It started after someone sat with him." The nurse looked curiously around the room. "A family member?" Alexander smiled faintly. "No, just another mother." A short time later, the attending physician arrived for Ethan's morning evaluation. He spoke gently with the nursing staff before approaching the bed. Ethan slowly opened his eyes, blinked at the morning light, and quietly looked toward his father. It was the first time in days that Alexander had seen recognition instead of exhaustion. "Good morning, buddy," he said warmly. Ethan answered with the smallest nod. It was a simple movement, but to Alexander it felt larger than any business victory he had ever celebrated. During the examination, Ethan remained noticeably calmer than before. He listened when the physician spoke, accepted routine care without withdrawing into silence, and even whispered a quiet, "Thank you," to the nurse before she left the room. Nothing miraculous had happened overnight. His condition had not suddenly disappeared. Yet his willingness to engage with the people trying to help him had quietly returned, and everyone in the room noticed the difference. After the physician completed his assessment, he turned toward Alexander. "We still have the same medical plan," he explained calmly, "but emotional comfort plays an important role in every child's recovery." Whatever helped Ethan relax last night may have given him the confidence to participate more fully today. Alexander thought immediately of Naomi Parker. Leaving Ethan comfortably resting with a nurse, he walked into the hallway, just as Naomi and Maya emerged from their room, carrying a small backpack and preparing for Maya's follow-up appointment. Maya smiled brightly at her mother while holding her stuffed rabbit beneath one arm. Alexander approached with quiet gratitude. "Miss Parker." Naomi turned with a gentle smile. "Good morning." Alexander looked genuinely moved. I wanted to thank you. Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in days. Naomi's expression softened. I am very happy to hear that. Alexander shook his head slightly. You gave him something none of us could. Naomi smiled with quiet humility. I did not give him anything new. I simply reminded him that he was not alone. Before Alexander could respond, Maya reached up and gently took her mother's hand. Naomi looked down at her daughter with the same calm warmth she had offered Ethan only hours earlier. Watching them together, Alexander suddenly understood that the greatest strength Naomi carried was not extraordinary knowledge or remarkable talent. It was the steady compassion she practiced every single day without expecting recognition. For the first time since Ethan had entered the hospital, Alexander felt something quietly returning to his own heart as well. It was not certainty. It was hope, and after so many difficult nights, hope felt like the beginning of everything. The next morning unfolded with a quiet sense of possibility that no one inside St. Gabriel Children's Medical Center wanted to disturb. Sunlight reflected gently across polished hallway floors while nurses greeted families with warm smiles. And for the first time in many days, Room 417 felt less like a place where hope had disappeared and more like a place where it had quietly returned. Ethan Whitmore sat up against his pillows watching the city through the wide hospital window. He still looked tired, but there was curiosity in his eyes instead of fear. A breakfast tray rested on the rolling table beside him. For several mornings it had remained almost untouched before being quietly taken away. Today was different. Alexander Whitmore carefully placed the tray closer to his son without saying a word. Ethan looked at the small bowl of oatmeal, then at the sliced bananas arranged beside it. After a brief pause, he slowly picked up the spoon. Alexander held his breath without realizing it. Ethan lifted one spoonful, tasted it, and swallowed. Then he took another. It was only a few bites, but they felt larger than every business deal Alexander had ever completed. A nurse standing near the doorway smiled warmly before making a quick note in Ethan's chart. That is wonderful to see, she said gently. Small steps often become the biggest victories. Ethan quietly nodded before taking another spoonful. A short time later, Naomi Parker and Maya stopped by the room on their way to complete Maya's follow-up appointment. Naomi knocked softly before entering. Ethan looked toward her almost immediately. Hi, he whispered. Naomi smiled with genuine warmth. Good morning, Ethan. You look brighter today. Ethan glanced at the empty spoon in his hand. I ate breakfast. Maya clapped her hands softly with excitement. That is great. Ethan smiled shyly for what seemed like the first time in weeks. Alexander watched the simple exchange with gratitude. There were no dramatic speeches, no impossible promises, only quiet encouragement shared between two families who had been strangers less than 24 hours earlier. After Maya left with a nurse for her appointment, Alexander and Naomi remained outside the room for a few peaceful moments. May I ask you something? Alexander said. Naomi nodded. Of course. He looked toward Ethan through the window before speaking. How did you know what he needed? Naomi leaned gently against the hallway wall. I did not know exactly what Ethan needed. I only remembered what Maya needed during one of the hardest seasons of our lives. Alexander listened carefully as Naomi continued. Several years ago, Maya spent months returning to hospitals after a serious illness. The doctors cared for her with incredible dedication, but every visit made her more anxious. One evening, an older pediatric nurse told me something I have never forgotten. She said children do not always need us to remove every fear. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to sit beside the fear until it becomes smaller. Alexander lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Naomi smiled gently. That changed how I cared for Maya. I stopped trying to fill every silence with words. I stopped asking her to be brave every minute. Instead, I stayed present. I listened. I breathed slowly so she could borrow my calm until she found her own. Alexander remained silent for several moments. No one ever explained it to me that way. Naomi's expression remained humble. Doctors heal in remarkable ways. Parents love in remarkable ways. Sometimes children need both at the same time. At that moment, Ethan looked toward the hallway and quietly raised one hand in a small wave. Naomi smiled and waved back. It was a simple gesture, almost unnoticed by everyone else walking through the corridor. Yet for Alexander, it became another gentle reminder that healing is often measured not only by medical charts, but but also by the quiet moments when a child begins reaching back toward the world with hope once again. Another sunrise brought a different feeling to the fourth floor of St. Gabriel Children's Medical Center. The familiar sounds remained the same. Heart monitors continued their steady rhythm. Nurses greeted families with quiet kindness, and sunlight stretched across the polished hallway floor. Yet inside room 417, there was a gentle sense of movement that had been missing for weeks. Ethan Whitmore was sitting beside the window wrapped in a light gray blanket, carefully holding a sketchbook that one of the hospital volunteers had left for him the previous afternoon. Colored pencils rested neatly beside the pages. He was not drawing much, only tracing slow circles across the paper, but Alexander Whitmore noticed something remarkable. His son was choosing to do something again. That simple decision felt more important than words could describe. The attending physician entered with a warm smile before reviewing Ethan's overnight observations. He listened patiently as Ethan answered a few quiet questions, accepted his morning examination without hesitation, and even looked directly at the doctor while speaking. After completing the visit, the physician stepped into the hallway with Alexander. His medical condition still requires careful treatment, he explained calmly. That has not changed overnight. However, his emotional engagement has improved noticeably. He is resting better, eating small meals, communicating more consistently, and cooperating with the care team. Those are meaningful signs because they allow us to continue helping him more effectively. Alexander slowly exhaled, feeling relief replace a weight he had carried for far too long. So there is real progress. The physician nodded. There is encouraging progress. We remain careful, but today gives us more reason for hope than yesterday did. As the morning continued, Naomi Parker and Maya returned to room 417, carrying 2 small paper cups filled with fresh fruit from the hospital cafeteria. Maya smiled shyly before placing 1 cup beside Ethan. The strawberries were really good today, she said. Ethan looked at the colorful fruit before quietly picking up a blueberry. Thank you. Maya sat in the chair beside him while opening her own cup. Neither child spoke for several minutes. They simply shared breakfast while looking out the window at the city below. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt comfortable. Naomi watched from the doorway with a gentle smile. Alexander stepped beside her. This is the first time I have seen him sit with another child in weeks, he whispered. Naomi nodded softly. Children often remind each other that life still exists outside the hospital room. A volunteer arrived carrying a small cart filled with board games and art supplies. Ethan looked toward the cart with quiet curiosity before turning to Maya. Do you want to draw something together? Maya smiled brightly. Only if you help me color the sky. Alexander watched the 2 children spread paper across the rolling bedside table while choosing colored pencils with careful concentration. There was no dramatic celebration, no sudden transformation. Only 2 children sharing an ordinary morning. Yet after so many difficult days, ordinary suddenly felt extraordinary. Later that afternoon, the physician reviewed Ethan's newest observations with the care team. The encouraging changes continued. Better sleep had led to better participation. Better participation supported the treatment already in place. Every small improvement strengthened the next one. As Alexander stood quietly outside the room, he realized something that had never appeared on any medical report. Healing had not begun the moment fear disappeared. Healing had begun the moment his son no longer felt he had to face that fear by himself. And sometimes the smallest acts of genuine compassion become the strongest partners medicine could ever hope to have. By the end of the week, the 4th floor no longer felt quite the same. Nurses smiled more often when they passed room 417. Volunteers lingered a little longer outside the open door. And even the afternoon sunlight seemed warmer as it settled across the quiet room, where Ethan Whitmore now spent part of each day reading, drawing, or talking softly with Maya. His recovery remained gradual, exactly as the physicians had explained, yet every small step forward carried genuine meaning. He greeted nurses by name, asked for his favorite blue-colored pencil instead of staring silently at the ceiling, and even laughed quietly when Maya insisted that every picture needed at least one smiling cloud. Those simple moments filled Alexander Whitmore with gratitude he could barely describe. Late one afternoon, however, the peaceful rhythm changed when a senior consulting physician requested a private meeting with Alexander. Inside a nearby conference room, several members of the medical team reviewed Ethan's latest progress reports. The senior physician folded his hands before speaking with calm professionalism. "Mr. Whitmore, we are encouraged by Ethan's emotional improvement. At the same time, we must be careful about maintaining appropriate clinical boundaries. We understand another parent has been spending time with your son." Alexander nodded. "Naomi Parker has simply been visiting him with my permission." The physician continued respectfully. "We appreciate her kindness. However, families may begin believing she possesses abilities beyond what she has ever claimed. We must ensure that hope remains connected to realistic expectations and evidence-based care." Alexander listened without becoming defensive. He understood the physician's responsibility. "I agree completely," he replied. "She has never claimed to replace medical treatment. In fact, she has reminded me more than once that she is not a doctor." At that very moment, Naomi happened to arrive outside room 417, carrying a small puzzle Maya wanted to share with Ethan. She noticed the meeting through the glass wall, but quietly waited in the hallway without interrupting. A nurse approached her with an apologetic smile. "Some questions have come up about your visits." Naomi nodded gently. "I expected they might." The nurse looked concerned. "Does that upset you?" Naomi smiled with quiet grace. "Not at all. When people care deeply about children, asking careful questions is part of protecting them." A few minutes later, Alexander stepped into the hallway. His expression carried both gratitude and concern. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I never wanted your kindness to create complications." Naomi shook her head. "There are no complications. Everyone here wants the same thing. They are protecting Ethan in the way they know best." Alexander looked at her with genuine respect. "Would you be willing to explain that to the team?" Naomi agreed without hesitation. Inside the conference room, she greeted every physician with a warm smile before speaking calmly. "I have never offered medical advice. I have never asked anyone to change Ethan's treatment. Every improvement belongs to the remarkable professionals caring for him every day. I simply sat beside a frightened child because I remembered what my own daughter once needed. If anything I have done has helped, it is because compassion works best alongside excellent medicine, never instead of it." The room remained quiet for several moments. The senior physician finally smiled. "Thank you, Miss Parker. That is exactly what we hoped to hear." As the meeting ended, mutual respect quietly replaced uncertainty. Later that evening, Ethan and Maya finished their puzzle together beside the window, while nurses completed their routine rounds. Alexander watched from the doorway and realized true humility never demands recognition. It simply keeps serving others with the same quiet heart, even when every eye in the room is watching. Several more days passed, and the quiet confidence growing inside room 417 slowly began appearing in places no one had expected. The nurses noticed Ethan Whitmore asking simple questions about the weather outside, instead of withdrawing into silence. The child life specialists found him willing to join short activities with other young patients. Even the hospital staff who had only exchanged polite greetings with him before now received small smiles that seemed almost impossible only a week earlier. None of these moments erased the challenges he continued to face, yet together they painted a picture of a child gradually finding his way back to the world around him. During the weekly care conference, the attending physician reviewed Ethan's latest observations with the medical team. He carefully compared notes from previous days before looking toward Alexander Whitmore with encouraging news. His clinical treatment remains the same, but his cooperation has improved consistently. He is sleeping more regularly, participating during evaluations, maintaining better nutrition, and showing stronger emotional engagement. Those changes are helping us provide more effective care. Alexander quietly thanked every member of the team before asking only one question. "Does Ethan have more reason for hope today than he did last week?" The physician smiled warmly. "Yes, we believe he does." The answer stayed with Alexander long after the meeting ended. He walked back toward room 417, carrying nothing except gratitude. Outside the room, Naomi Parker was helping Maya finish a colorful drawing of the Chicago skyline. Ethan carefully added bright blue clouds above the buildings before holding the picture at arm's length with quiet satisfaction. "It looks happier now," he whispered. Maya nodded enthusiastically. "Every picture needs hope somewhere." Naomi smiled as she watched the children. Alexander paused beside her. "The doctors shared encouraging updates this morning." Naomi looked genuinely pleased. "That is wonderful news. Alexander lowered his voice. They also reminded me that every improvement belongs to the medical team working so hard each day. Naomi nodded immediately. They are absolutely right. Alexander continued. But I also told them something else. My son began believing in tomorrow again after someone reminded him that he did not have to face today alone. Naomi looked toward Ethan without answering for a moment. Hope is never a replacement for excellent care, she said softly. Sometimes it simply helps a child accept the care that is already waiting for them. Later that afternoon, the attending physician stopped by room 417 during routine rounds. He watched Ethan and Maya quietly finishing their drawing before turning toward Alexander and Naomi. I would like both of you to know something, he said. The progress we are seeing comes from many people working together. Medicine, nursing, therapy, family support, emotional comfort, patience, and trust all matter. No single person deserves all the credit, but every act of kindness has helped create an environment where healing has a better opportunity to continue. Naomi smiled gratefully. That is exactly how I hoped everyone would see it. Before leaving, the physician accepted the children's drawing and asked permission to display a copy in the family lounge. Ethan looked surprised. Really? The physician nodded. It reminds us that every difficult journey still deserves a bright sky. As evening settled over the hospital, the picture was placed on a small bulletin board near the elevators where families quietly paused to admire it while waiting for visiting hours to begin. Beneath the drawing, someone wrote a simple sentence that soon became a quiet source of encouragement throughout the floor. Healing grows stronger when knowledge, compassion, and hope choose to walk together. Alexander read those words before looking through the window at his son laughing softly with Maya. And for the first time since entering St. Gabriel Children's Medical Center, the future no longer felt like an impossible place waiting somewhere beyond reach. It felt like another morning that was slowly, faithfully making its way toward them. 6 months later, the bright autumn sun shone gently through the wide glass entrance of St. Gabriel Children's Medical Center, welcoming families who arrived carrying equal measures of hope and uncertainty. The fourth floor looked much the same as it had before, with cheerful artwork lining the walls, volunteers greeting children with warm smiles, and nurses moving calmly from room to room. Yet one small detail had quietly changed. Near the entrance to room 417 hung a framed drawing of a blue Chicago sky, created by 2 children who had once shared crayons, quiet conversations, and the courage to face difficult days together. Beneath the picture, a simple brass plaque read, "Hope grows stronger when it is shared." Ethan Whitmore walked confidently beside his father through the hallway, carrying a backpack decorated with tiny astronaut patches. His smile came easily now, and although he still returned for regular follow-up appointments, the fear that had once filled every hospital visit had slowly been replaced by calm familiarity. Alexander Whitmore looked at his son with quiet gratitude before stopping outside the same room where everything had begun. Moments later, another elevator door opened, and Naomi Parker stepped into the hallway, holding Maya's hand. Maya's follow-up visit had become little more than a routine check, and she happily waved the stuffed rabbit she had carried through every hospital stay. The 2 children immediately recognized one another and hurried together toward the framed drawing, laughing as they remembered which clouds each of them had colored months before. Alexander smiled as Naomi approached. "I have wanted to thank you properly for a long time," he said. Naomi gently shook her head. "There is nothing to thank me for. Ethan worked very hard. His doctors, nurses, therapists, and your family never stopped believing in him." Alexander looked thoughtfully toward the care team moving through the hallway. "You reminded me that healing is never carried by one pair of hands." Naomi smiled warmly. No child should ever have to depend on only one pair of hands. Later that afternoon, the hospital gathered families, physicians, nurses, therapists, child life specialists, and volunteers inside a small community room overlooking the city. Alexander quietly announced that his family's foundation would establish a permanent family support program dedicated to helping parents learn practical ways to comfort children during long hospital stays while working alongside medical professionals. He asked the hospital staff to guide every part of the program because, as he explained, true healing always belongs to an entire team. Then he turned toward Naomi. "Would you accept one request?" Naomi looked surprised. "What is it?" Alexander smiled. Would you help us teach families what you taught me? Not because you performed a miracle, but because you reminded a frightened father that listening can become its own kind of medicine when it walks beside science, compassion, and expert care. Naomi looked around the room at the physicians who had welcomed her honesty, the nurses who had cared tirelessly for every child, and the families quietly holding one another's hands. She nodded with humble gratitude. I would be honored if it helps even one child feel less alone. As the gathering ended, Ethan and Maya carefully hung one final drawing beside the first. It showed two children looking out a hospital window while the morning sun rose above the skyline. At the bottom, they had written a single sentence in bright blue letters. Someone listened. Walking toward the elevator, Naomi glanced back one last time before taking Maya's hand. Alexander stood beside Ethan, watching families smile as they passed the drawings. Neither of them spoke because no words were needed anymore. Some people believe miracles arrive in a single extraordinary moment. Yet the most lasting ones often begin much more quietly, when one compassionate heart chooses to sit beside another, reminding them that hope is never something we carry alone, and when kindness joins skilled hands and faithful hearts, tomorrow slowly becomes possible again.